I'm a 19-year-old student. I live in Ascot Vale, a relatively safe suburb in the city of Melbourne, Australia. About 2 months ago, I went through what was perhaps the most frightening experience in my entire life. What makes it even worse for me is that I could have easily prevented it, but due to my fear and confusion, I put it off. Please note, this is still under investigation as the local police have yet to capture this man. It was Friday, the 21st of August, 2015. I had just come home from university, which was around 8:30 p.m., and I thought I'd take a nap. Fast forward 3 hours, I was awoken to a loud banging on my door. I was completely exhausted and stupidly opened the door thinking it was my sister coming back from the pub. Instead, I was greeted by a ghastly figure, definitely mid-40s, maybe early 50s, and he asked me if I knew where I could find a specific address, which happened to be the address of the soon-to-be victim of this man. I knew where it was. It was literally 7 houses down the road. But the man, through my complete exhaustion, was absolutely suspicious. He reeked of alcohol and was clenching his fists in his pocket holding onto something, which later turned out to be a knife. I told him that I was new to the area and I didn't know where it was, and after an angry and frustrated look from him, he took off back into the night. I slumped back into my bed and fell asleep instantly. I awoke at 1 a.m. to the door knocking again, only to realize it was my sister. She told me something that made my stomach drop. She said that the man had been pacing up and down the street and asked her and her friends for directions to a specific house, which my sister, of course, led him to. It was the small unit which the victim lived at. In the early morning of 4 to 5:30 a.m., I could hear men shouting loudly, like extremely loudly, and my instinct told me it was that homeless-looking man confronting the victim, but I hesitated and didn't even bother to call the police, thinking it was just an argument, which was normal around Melbourne. I live with regret to this day when I found out that the victim was viciously stabbed to death and dumped outside his apartment only for the police to discover an hour later. The homeless-looking man disappeared without a trace. I gave the police my description of him, but through my exhaustion I wasn't 100% sure. What I was sure of, though, is that I could have stopped a murder that night, and I now have to live with the guilt of that man's life. This was my only bump-in with the murderer, but I really hope it stays that way. My second year of college was a difficult year. I wish I could say that it was due to organic chemistry or boyfriend drama or anything other than what actually happened. I started out my year in a great dorm. I loved my hallmates, my room, and the fact that a dining hall was less than 100 feet away. Obviously, I spent a lot of my time there, and I got to know the staff. I had worked in a restaurant for 2 years before going to school, and I could identify with the struggles that come with being a food service worker, especially because I was at a notoriously snobby school, so I sympathized with the staff having to deal with the rich kids and their entitled bullshit. Most of the staff were lovely people, but one in particular seemed to take a real interest in me. He was a young white man, not much older than myself, named Matt. He always went out of his way to talk to me and ask me questions about myself and how school was going. One evening I was doing homework in the dining hall around closing hours. Matt sat with me and we chatted for a bit. He said he was off of work and heading to his car to smoke a bowl before he went home and asked if I wanted to join. I had only smoked a few times before, but I enjoyed it and he seemed harmless enough, so I agreed. I was still very much a sheltered child, and to me, he didn't seem like a bad guy, so he couldn't be. We lit up in his car in the parking lot behind the dining hall, and I got a glimpse of the real Matt. He ranted about how his ex-girlfriend had recently dumped him. He called her a bitch and a whore and told me unnecessary details about their sex life. The virgin in me was incredibly uncomfortable, only made worse by the paranoia brought on by the weed. He also went on about how much he hated the students at my university, especially the girls, saying they treated him as less than human. I was completely speechless, and when I didn't respond, he tried to apologize for going off, saying that I was different and that he wanted to get to know me better. I remember blurting out that I needed to go, and I got the hell out of his car. He got out too and shouted after me to come back, and I thought he might chase me, but he didn't, and I got back to my room safely. I avoided that dining hall like the plague for the next week, and I didn't see him again until the one night that still haunts me to this day. Around midnight, I was walking back to my dorm alone from a function at the Christian Center, which was only about 2 blocks away. I know walking by myself was stupid, but the buses weren't running and I felt bad asking someone to walk with me because there were some steep inclines between the center and my dorm. I was walking along an empty residential street that was just around the corner from my dorm when I noticed a black SUV that was creeping along behind me. It was going so slow that it was hard not to notice. At first, I tried not to panic, but it quickly clicked that it was the same car as Matt's. I started to run when it sped up ahead of me and a man in a ski mask jumped out at me. I just knew it was Matt. From here, things happened very fast. I tried to run the other way, but he grabbed me from behind and was struggling to get my wrists into handcuffs while simultaneously pulling me toward his car. I was screaming at the top of my lungs and fighting like hell. We fought each other for a few minutes like that before he dropped the handcuffs and I was able to slam my heel into his foot. I think those two things and my relentless struggling shook his confidence because he ran back to his car and sped off. Freaked out, I ran back to my room, constantly looking back to see if he was after me. Thankfully, he didn't follow and I was able to call the police. I was very lucky that night, not only because I got away, but also because he was caught shortly after I called 911. He was arrested, and when the police searched his car, they found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife. During interrogation, he confessed that he was bitter and depressed over his breakup and wanted to make someone, quote, feel pain like he feels it. Nearly a year later, after a painful testimony from me, he was convicted to 40 years in prison with a 32-year suspension for abduction and intent to defile. I'm not entirely sure how to start this story. You sit there listening to these stories on YouTube, fascinated thinking that it will never happen to you, and for a long time you live in the sweet ignorance that everyone loves you and no one is out to hurt you. Until someone actually tries to. Here is some background information. I'm a 20-year-old 5-foot Hispanic female, and this happened, well, started happening a few months ago. I'm not an active person, but every once in a while I like to go for a run. The neighborhood I live in is a gated community. The only downside is that just outside my neighborhood is a major highway that runs out of my town and into the barren plains of Texas. This highway separates my neighborhood from a few local stores. One day I decided to run as I usually did every Monday and Wednesday. I run about 3 miles safely across the highway and through a rough neighborhood before I reached the store I wanted. I walked through the aisle, wiping the sweat from my forehead, and grabbed a water bottle. That's when I noticed a man maybe a few years older than me staring at me from the end of the aisle. Awkwardly, I gave him a small smile and walked to the register to pay. In the corner of my eye, I could see him follow me. I felt his gaze on my back as I left the store and placed the bottle of water in my small backpack that carried my wallet and pocket knife. As I ran through the rough neighborhood, a white car going the opposite direction passed me. I didn't notice it till it stopped in reverse till I was parallel to the driver who lowered his window. It was the man from the store. "Need a ride?" he asked, flashing me a wide grin. "Oh no, thank you." I slowed my run to a walk as I spoke. "Aw, come on, you look tired." He smirked, still reversing to match my speed. I laughed and shook my head. "I'm running, you'll ruin my workout," I said jokingly. He seemed to get angry at this and raised his window before driving off. Fast forward a bit later. I waited for the cross light to turn green so I could cross the highway when I saw the same white car driving past me. It was blasting rap music, but this time all the windows were lowered. Now 3 men could be seen in the back seat. I didn't think much of it as I crossed the highway. The next few days I began to see the man around my job. I work at a pet store in the fish area and I could see this man just wander around the store, never really buying anything. One day he struck up a conversation with me. He asked my name, age, if I had a boyfriend, which I did. I answered truthfully, treating him as I would any customer. His name was John, he was 22, and he said he went to UNT. He looked annoyed when I said I had a boyfriend and couldn't go out to lunch with him. He quickly left, but not before saying, "Oh, by the way, nice Kia." Now, this struck me as odd. How did he know what car I drove? A few days later, I hadn't seen the man and honestly forgot about the whole thing. Until one morning I went outside and saw that someone had wrecked my car. My car had a huge dent in the back passenger side, my bumper was on the ground, and my brake light was smashed. The police called it a hit and run and scolded me for parking so close to the street. Okay, but I live in a cul-de-sac. How does someone run into a car when the street is a huge circle? Anyway, after a few carless days, I walk out to go check the mail. At the end of my street, I see a white car with the front bumper smashed in. My only regret is not telling anyone what was happening. A month went by and I finally had my car back. The first place I took it was my boyfriend's house. I spent 8 hours with him before I left his house at about 12:30 p.m. Driving down the highway, it takes about 15 minutes to get from his house to mine. About 5 minutes into the drive, I noticed a car tailgating me. Its headlights weren't even on. I quickly call my boyfriend, who tells me to drive between the other cars. I do so. The car stays steady on my heels. I speed up. The car speeds up. It wasn't until I passed a police car did the car following me finally back off. Needless to say, I didn't get that much sleep that night. The next night I was closing at my job, and part of my job was taking the trash to the dumpster in the back. Usually the dog trainer, Joe, joins me. He's this huge man, about 50, with a loud voice. I felt safe around Joe. Everyone did. But today Joe wasn't feeling well, so I took out the trash by myself. I walked out the back of the store and walked towards the fenced-off dumpster. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. The white car was parked a few feet away and I saw the door of the fence close quickly. Now, this could have been the wind. Maybe the morning shift forgot to lock the gate and the wind was just blowing it. I'm not sure, but something in my gut told me to not go near the dumpster. I quickly dropped the trash and walked back inside the store. I told my manager and Joe what had happened. My manager just rolled his eyes and said it must have been a bum trying to get the cans of cat food we threw out. Being used to kicking out homeless people, he walked to the dumpster and opened the gate. After a few minutes, my manager walked back into the store, a grim look on his face. He ordered Joe to walk me to my car. It wasn't until later that week that I had heard what my manager actually found. A man in his mid-20s hiding behind the dumpster. My manager scared him off, but what he left behind will haunt me to this day. Where he stood was a pocket knife and a few zip ties. What made things worse was when the man took off, the white car started and he got into the passenger side. I'm terrified. I've alerted the police, and since then I've not seen the man or the white car. But since then, my boyfriend escorts me to and from work. I no longer run, and I carry a small taser on me at all times now. I'm still struggling to get my life back. Maybe telling my story will help. To everyone out there, please tell someone if something doesn't feel right. Hello friends. So first off, thank you for watching, and sorry I haven't uploaded much lately. Some really unexpected stuff has been going on. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that stupid copyright stuff happening, so I've spent the majority of the last 5 days working on fixing that. I've also been going through all the stories you all have sent me, and thank you for sending me them. On top of this, I also got in a car accident a couple days ago, which is always nice, and yes, I'm fine, but my car isn't. So now I also have no transportation to go get food, and my mic keeps picking up my stomach growling, which is really irritating. I don't know any places that deliver between 4 a.m. to 9 a.m., which is the time when I record usually. Anyway, if you have any personal stories similar to the ones I tell on my channel, feel free to email me them. My email's in the description of pretty much all my videos. Please make the subject of the email what kind of story it is you're sending me. For example, a stalker story, a deep web story, etc., and please make it at least readable. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I also thought of a catchphrase for the outros of my videos. Please tell me what you think. And as always, fuck copyright.